Welcome to the Aero General Service channel. I'm your host, Corey Bartolotti. And in today's video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making some major improvements to the system that our client had installed. And I'm not going to lie, whoever installed this system, they did a horrible job. I hate to say it, but it's the truth. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be redoing all of the drain lines in the back. We're going to keep the sump pump basin the same. We're just going to sink it lower into the ground and put the geofabric and drain rock around it. We are going to be keeping the sump pump line that's already existing in the ground, but in the front of the home, we are going to sink the 15 feet of it lower into the ground because whoever installed it, they put it way too close to the surface. I mean, to the point where the edger from the yard guys hit it a few times and they busted the sump pump line. So let's go ahead and get started. Now this is going to be an open French drain, meaning the rock on top is going to be exposed so that way water can just travel freely directly down into our French drain. All the surface water will be collected very quickly that way, and it will be able to take in subsurface water as well. Now for this install, we're going to be using the French Drain Man high octane 4-inch drain pipe. This pipe is amazing and I do endorse this pipe. So we're going to start by moving the rocks to the side and cutting through the landscaping fabric that is underneath the stone. That way we can go ahead and we can dig our trench in order to install our French drain pipe. So now as we were digging and exploring, we quickly found out why this sump pump failed. The reason why it failed is because not only did they use a pigtail float in there, that pigtail float probably got stuck and it kept the pump running and cycling non-stop when there was no water to even be pumped out. Now that's the first thing that they did wrong. The second thing that they did wrong is they did not put the check valve inside the sump pump pit. Instead, what they did was they buried the check valve in the ground, and you're not supposed to put these check valves on their side like that, especially when it's a flapper check valve. Now, if it's a check valve with a spring, if they're spring loaded, you can put those on the side, but you typically do not want to use those with sump pumps because those take a lot of pressure to push those springs to open the valve up. So a flapper valve, you always want to make sure that that's upright and the flapper is going the correct way, and you want it somewhere where it can be accessed in case it ever does need to be changed out or maintained in any way. Once we got this check valve all cleaned off, we went ahead and we disassembled it and we took it off. We inspected it and made sure that it was okay, and we're going to go ahead and just repurpose it, but this time we're going to set it up correctly by putting it inside the basin in an upright position with the flapper facing the correct direction. Now, I suspect the reason why this basin was not flush with the ground is because when we took it out and inspected it, there was no perforated holes at the bottom. And like I have said on past videos, anytime that you install a sump pump basin or a catch basin or any kind of basin, you need to perforate the bottom because it will float to the surface. It will float up once that groundwater starts to get around it. They're buoyant, they do float, they're plastic. So you need to perforate it, and you need to put a good double punched geotextile fabric around the bottom of the basin along with drain rock. That way that basin can drain out and does not hold a bunch of water like a petri dish. All right, now that we have the sump basin installed properly, we're going to go ahead and continue to dig our trench. And as you can see, we have a couple of sprinkler lines that we're going to have to run our pipes underneath. And we also have a random wire that we discovered while digging this trench. We're not really sure what it's for, but we're going to go ahead and avoid it and just bury it back when we're done. It's very important when you're digging a trench for a French drain, that French drain pipe is going to lay at the bottom of the trench. So you want that trench to have a slope to it. That way the water can be carried in the correct direction that you want it to go. Now we're using a tape measure to go ahead and get our measurements so we can go ahead and roll out our geofabric and cut it to the exact measurement that we want. So now another great debate in the drainage world is whether to use geofabric or not, and what kind of geofabric to use. Well, if you want my opinion on it, and everybody's got their own opinion on it, I believe that you should use a good double punched geotextile fabric, a DOT, that's Department of Transportation fabric. It's the one that they use under roadways. There's a reason they use this fabric. It's because it does work, especially if it's installed correctly. Now, I've heard the whole, if you're in clay soils, geofabric doesn't work, you're best not to use it. I have to disagree with that because clay will migrate into the stone and it will clog the voids in the stone, and you're going to clog your French drain. So you might as well use the fabric, even if the clay is going to compact up against the fabric and cause it to drain slower. It's still going to drain, and it's better than the clay migrating in the stone and completely clogging the system over time. At least that's my opinion on it. So at the end of the day, do what you want. This trench is going to contain two pipes. We're going to have our French drain pipe at the very bottom of the trench. It's going to be touching the geofabric. There's not going to be any drain rock underneath this French drain. We want that pipe on the bottom of the trench. That way all the water can get moved through the trench, through that pipe, and it's not just sitting in there. The next pipe that is going to be going in this trench is going to be going on top of the French drain pipe. We're going to be using our SDR35 PVC 4-inch drain pipe, and we're going to use that to grab the gutter that it runs along the entire screen porch, and we are also going to be grabbing an additional catch basin to collect surface water that gathers in front of this doorway. These systems are going to be totally separate from one another. That way, any contaminants that get into that catch basin or that go down that gutter downspout and they make it into our SDR pipe, they're going to stay in that solid pipe and they're not going to contaminate our closed French drain system. Now, the way we're going to bring these two systems together is we're going to be using a Y connection. And the bottom is going to connect the French drain tile into the Y. We're going to be using a corrugated to PVC adapter to make that connection. And the top, we're going to go ahead and put a Street 45 on the top, and that is going to connect the SDR solid pipe. That way the two systems remain separate, but can both drain into the same line that goes into the sump pump basin. Once we have both pipes installed into this trench, we are not going to be putting any of the dirt back that came out of this trench. You do not want to put the dirt back. That defeats the purpose of building a French drain. Instead, we're going to be putting stone in place of that dirt back. Now that we have our 1.5-inch sump pump line installed into the sump basin, we went ahead and we made our repair to the section that check valve was improperly installed at. We went ahead and just used one normal cup link and one slip cup link in order to make that repair. We opted to use 1 to 1.5-inch stone to fill the trench with. That way the voids are nice and large to allow water to flow freely down to the bottom of our trench where our French drain tile is sitting. Once we raked the stone back over our open French drain, it was like we were never here. You won't even be able to tell where the French drain starts and where it ends. We're going to be replacing the burned out pigtail pump with a Zoller M53. Now, I highly recommend the Zollers. They're very good pumps, either the M53 or the M98. Those are the two pumps that I recommend. Now, the M98 is going to move a little bit more water quicker than the M53, but for the money, the M53 does very well. Now, these pumps are cast iron, so they help displace the heat, and they also have oil that's sealed into the motor, and that also helps keep it cool. Now, you want to use the M53 or the M98 because the float is a larger float, and it also has a protection bar that allows things to not jam up the float as easily, and it helps to protect it. Now, a common mistake that I see made way too often is whenever you're gluing any kind of PVC together that's going to be under pressure, you want to use a primer before you use the solvent cement. Now, the reason for this is because not only does that primer clean that pipe of any contaminants, but it starts to prep the plastic. It starts to actually soften the plastic up and get it ready to be melted with the solvent cement in order to fuse those two pieces of plastic together. It is very important to use a primer, in my opinion, whenever you're gluing pressurized PVC. Not only does this allow the pipes to fuse better, but it's going to decrease any chances of that pipe popping off at one of the joints. Now, you can go ahead and just use the solvent cement and you probably will be okay, but there's also that chance that maybe it won't be okay and it'll end up popping if it's under too much pressure at one point. So in my opinion, it is best to both use a primer and solvent cement to get the job done. Now I'm going to be using 245s in order to sink this sump pump line lower into the ground. That way the weed whip or the mower doesn't hit it again and mess it up. And at the end of the sump pump line, we're going to be using one of our percolation tees with geofabric and drain rock. That way it can drain into the ground and perk a lot quicker than if you use just an elbow with some pre-drilled holes in it. Now what happens when you use those elbows with the holes in it, all that does is it gets clogged with sediment, dirt, debris, and those holes are rendered completely useless, and you just have the sump pump line or whatever the drain line is, it's just going to hold water and it's going to have a petri dish in there. If you use a percolation tee at the end with geofabric and drain rock, this will allow sediment and debris to go through into the rock and still allow that water to perk easily out into the soil. Now, this method works very well in sandy soils. In clay soil, not so much, because clay is very slow draining as it is. It will still work in clay, but it's going to take a lot longer, and that clay is going to have to dry out in order for that system to dry out. But the percolation tee method is much better than using an elbow with a couple of holes in it. We're letting the hose run directly onto the stone so that water can make its way down through our open French drain and enter the French drain man's high octane pipe, where it is then carried into the sump pump basin. That sump pump then lifts the water up and it takes it through that 1.5-inch line all the way to the front of the house, where it discharges via a pop-up emitter in the yard. Now, I'm going to be going back to this system at the end of this video in a pouring rain. That way you guys can see the pop-up discharge every time that pump kicks on. And it is a lot of water that is discharging through the yard and making its way into the street. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I appreciate everybody's support. And I'm going to go ahead and link the French Drain Man's channel in the description. That way, if you're interested, you can go check out his channel. And we are currently serving the Hillsborough, Pasco, and Pinellas counties of Florida. So if you have a wet and soggy yard or need any kind of drainage, go ahead and give us a call. We can come out there and assess the situation and design a system that fits your needs. And until next time, this is Aero General Services signing off.